how queer people experience grief differently, what are some of the unique challenges we face when addressing our mortality, what it means to grieve as LGBTQ plus people in systems that erase, police, or invalidate us. I'm just going to make a housekeeping note now. Do we have interpreters on screen?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Um, and the official title of today is Beyond Rainbows, All the Colors of Grief, Mortality, of Queer Mortality and Grief. So we are providing ASL interpretation today, which we're very excited about. We're also going to be showing captions to follow along. Helpful resources and links will be shared in chat as we move through the session. Follow-up email and slides will be provided, so there's no need to write notes or try to remember resources mentioned unless you're like me and you like to do that. Rules of engagement: listen, respectful sharing, hearing all voices, and three before me, which is once you've spoken, let three other people speak before you speak again. You can put questions and comments in the chat. That will be monitored throughout. We'll be muted during you will be muted during the presentation, but you can jump in the chat, and later we'll have an open discussion when we'll turn off the video recording, and everyone can participate. Um,
Hi,
so
sorry. I just want to make a quick note. It seems like
yeah,
the chat may not be working for folks. So just let you know, the way to communicate with us to send any comments or questions would be through the Q&A. So everyone has the ability to send in the Q&A, and once you see that, we'll be able to answer.
thanks, Alejandro. Um, so this series came from was inspired by a series called Queering Death. It's a series of articles by Zena Sharman and published in Extra, the online magazine. The idea is to provide the time, space, resources, and permission we need to let our grief unfurl into its fullest expressions for as long as we need. Um, we take an intergenerational, intersectional approach to loss and grieving, um, living life amidst uncertainty and increasing loss. Queering grief is an opportunity to resist and transform dominant narratives about grief and collectively imagine how we might build a world where we feel abundantly supported when we're grieving. And to understand where the challenges and barriers may be and how to address and empower ourselves, claim what's ours. How do these principles we are exploring to us personally build personal resilience? The sponsoring organizations for this webinar are Stonewall CDC Community Development Corporation and Stonewall Village NYC. Our mission is to help LGBTQ older adults secure welcoming housing and home care. And we have Stonewall Village NYC as an online platform that has resources and events like this. Our other presenter is La Vida Pride Treece Financial Group. And now we're going to go into self-introductions. And I want to, at this point, acknowledge the privilege that we understand that we're all three white people, and that we're talking about our own perspectives, and we may not be seeing or experiencing through others' life lenses. And so you should feel free when the discussions happen to, call us on that to provide insights that we haven't touched on during the presentation. My name is Paul Nagel. I am the founding executive director of Stonewall Community Development Corporation. I talked a little about what we do. We were formed in response to an assault on a friend of ours by a nursing home aide that eventually caused her death. Her name was Eleanor Cooper, and she was a famous lesbian activist and leader in New York City who actually was the executive director of a group called Coalition for Lesbian and Gay Rights, which after 13 years of trying to get a gay rights bill passed in the New York City Council, Coalition for Lesbian and Gay Rights stepped up and organized all of the various gay and lesbian organizations to stop competing with each other and to work together to get the gay rights bill passed, which happened in 1986. Sarah?
Hey, can you guys hear me? I'm Sarah Miller. I'm a hospice chaplain in Waco, Texas, which is really far away from probably most of you. I also own a grief coaching business and I help mostly professionals deal with grief and loss. My wife and I have been married for a few years and we have a really cute 13-year-old and two dogs and 12 chickens. So that's what you need to know about me. I'm the chicken lady.
And I'll go to me. It's David Troutman. I'm the other facilitator that's working with us today. I'm the director of La Vida Pride, which is a education initiative for Treece Financial Group to courses, resources, and connections to help older adults age out loud and proud and prepared, because a lot of end of life and a lot of discussions about grief and what we're talking about, planning for death, happen in financial planning, but it's way more than just the money or the practical ends of it. A lot of it's emotion based, and this is what we're going to be delving into: is the emotion based. I'm a gay man who's been married for 30. I've been together with my partner for 38 years. I have my eighth wedding anniversary this week. I have a 6-year-old daughter, and I have a lot of experience in it. Previous career working in hospice, so I kind of bring that knowledge to our discussion today. And personally, as I've been thinking about queer grief, uh, the birthday of one of my friends who just passed away, my first ever gay best friend, is next week. So grief is pretty fresh for me right now, and I think this might help me personally to kind of go through this. So, Paul, we've introduced ourselves. I'm going to go right into the next section, I think, and just address, welcome you all here today. And as Paul mentioned earlier, you know, we'll be touching on three major things. Sarah, Paul, and I will be going through them. But before we get started, like, we've all come from different spaces, different experiences, different phases of our life, different things happening with us. So I don't know if the chat has been fixed yet, that people can put it in the chat now. But if not, then we have the Q&A boxes open. And even though it's not a question, you can post it there. We're going to do an opening exercise, but to get us thinking for the opening exercise, there are three quotes from the article that Paul mentioned, was the queering, queering death series. I know we have slides for them. I think I have the first quote, just three quotes from that kind of inform what our discussion is going to be, and kind of what we can think about as we move into an opening exercise. And I'm going to ask everyone to reflect on it. So the first quote is, like LGBTQ2S plus people, ourselves, our grief is powerful and sacred. And that is the author, Zena Sharman, from the article. And I don't usually see the acronym LGBTQ2S, but it's LGBTQ2 Spirit plus, working in the indigenous people's expression for it. So I believe this is sacred work. I believe it is a sacred discussion and very powerful. So I'm happy to be part of it today. Sarah, you have our next quote.
Yeah, I love the next one that says, there are a million ways to grieve, as many ways as there are people. It's by Stephanie Lynn Kaufman, and I can't pronounce her second last name, but she's a disability justice educator and organizer. And I think it's really important to think in America, we spend a lot of time talking about not saying white people, but we do spend a lot of time talking about grief that looks normal for white types of folks. And so I appreciate that she says there's a million ways to grieve, just like there are a million ways of people.
Okay, and I'm next. And my favorite quote from the series is, if we're thinking about how we're going to queer grief, we also have to ask what powers are working against us that make it so we can't hold space for our grief. And it reminds me of the AIDS crisis. I'm 67 years old. I survived full-blown AIDS. And I remember a time when we were losing two or three friends a week. And memorials got to be so ubiquitous that you really had to do something special at your memorial to get people to come. And sometimes there were competing memorials. And so the more interesting memorial would be the one that people went to. And that got a lot of blowback from my straight friends. How could you, be so insouciant at a memorial? But my favorite one was for a guy named Dan who was a chef, and he used to throw wonderful parties, and he would always have a huge vat of cosmopolitans. And so his memorial was opening the basement of the Monster Bar and serving free cosmopolitans to people for 3 hours, which was hilarious and quite suitable. Dave?
Great. So so those are some pretty powerful and kind of thought-provoking expressions of queering grief, which really means looking at grief outside of the normal or practical or typical way. That grief really is unique and to all of us, and we have unique challenges and experiences as queer people ourselves. So the chat is now open to all. Somebody that's attending, please just chat. Just put, yay, I can chat, and then I'll know that we can chat. As we go into our opening kind of reflection and get everybody, yay, okay, people are doing it now. Okay, so we're just kind of ground ourselves before Sarah kind of gets into explaining what does it mean to queer grief and what are the different types of grief we experience. But just to take a moment to silently, reflect or jot down optionally in the chat if you like. A couple of thoughts and things to think about, and then we could talk about it later in the Q&A. What grief are you carrying right now? Like, what personal grief are you carrying? I expressed earlier personally, I'm grieving the recent death of my first best gay friend. Also, what grief do you carry that was never acknowledged or allowed space, or maybe is buried or hidden that we talked earlier about death being, I think before we started, that people are scared to talk about death. You might be scared to grieve about something or feel like you don't have the opportunity to do that, or you don't know how to do that. Are there things in your life that you're not acknowledging or that are hidden? And anticipatory grief, is something going to be, you fear a loss in your life, what grief are you anticipating? So just take a moment to kind of think about those questions. Jot some things down if you want. And then maybe as we talk through these issues and then get to discussion, you'll identify some of them and we can talk a little deeper about them. But just, that no matter what grief is, there's many different ways, as Sarah said, grief is that it can be old, it can be unresolved or unnamed. There are many, beyond, we talk about grief, end of life planning and loss of life. Grieving happens in many, many situations throughout life. So it's not just about death or grieving without death. Also grieving about our identities, like as we change through life, grieving our identities, grieving safety, a changed situation, or belonging or not belonging to a group can all cause us to have grief, and also how we grieve can be all affected by that. So, like I said, sharing is optional. You can put it in the chat, but you just say, because you're present here, just being here is enough, because you can feel the energy and we can kind of all be together and just know that this is a safe space to talk about it. So with that, I'm going to take a deep breath. We can all take a deep breath. And then Sarah can kind of do our main presentation before we get into some individual discussions. Sarah.
All right. I hope you guys appreciate my rainbow bookshelf behind me. It's very nice, isn't it? My wife said, don't use a Zoom background, just use our bookshelf because it looks really gay. It's like, okay, that's what makes us look gay, the bookshelf. All right, so wanted to talk a little bit about what defines queer grief. So queering grief is an invitation to create or reclaim mourning practices that enable us to be held in our grief. Queering grief is more expansive. I work with a lot of gay hospice patients. So hospice meaning they're going to probably die within 6 months or less. And I approach each of those families or people differently than I would my straight patients. Their grief is going to be different. It's going to look different. I love that we're talking about it being expansive. So some things that a lot of people in America want us to do is it's okay. God gave you all this time with that person. He needed another angel in heaven. I literally want to throw up when people say that. God doesn't need any angels in heaven. I'm not even sure there is a God. But if there is, I don't think he needs angels. And we have a lot of toxic positivity, like, oh, well, just be glad you had so and so for as long as you did, or they're in a better place, et cetera, et cetera. I also see with a lot of my queer families that, well, it wasn't really your husband, or she wasn't really your mom, or she was she really your sister-in-law? I mean, she was married to your sister, but so I see people really getting dismissed. So as if your grief and pain is not enough, you're also getting dismissed just by the fact that you or that person is gay, is queer. Um, we want people in America to get over it quickly. Usually you get 3 days of bereavement leave. So sorry your loved one died, get back to work. Get back to it, run the rat race, do the things, hit the glass ceiling. It's just not real for people to lose someone and then be right back to normal. This is for straight people and for gay people, for all of us. Just that kind of a gentle reminder that it's okay to be positive if you want to after someone has passed, but it's not necessary. It's okay to be really sad. You just lost someone you loved. I think jumping back into running the rat race is just, it's too hard, way too hard. Um, some of the things that are more specific to our culture, queer families, we have a thing called suffocated grief. I like that word because it literally does feel suffocating. It feels like we're not getting enough air. This is when grief is dismissed, punished, or pathologized. Like people want to say, well, that's mental illness. It's not mental illness, it's grief. Grief can show up in so many different ways, you guys. I hear people say, well, that person, they're on the struggle bus. Well, yeah, they just lost their mom, their daughter, their husband. Um, I think it's easy for straight professionals to give labels that are unkind to queer families because they're grieving in a maybe a different way or it's misunderstood. We see this sometimes with Black families in the emergency room. They tend to be louder, to grieve with more like gusto and passion. And then you'll hear white professionals say, oh God, that family is so loud, so much illness. And it's not, it's part of the culture. Or sometimes if you see a white family come in and they've lost their loved one and they're grieving very quietly because we've been taught to be quiet, to shame, be quiet, don't use your emotions. So you'll hear people say, well, guess they're not that upset. So you can't like it's like you can't win whether you scream and yell and the thrashing of teeth or if you're really quiet and you cry in the corner. And when you add queerness into that, it just complicates it. Because then it's like, well, God, those queer people, they're so flaming. They're so loud. Everyone has to know they're here. Or are they really a real family? Um, I had a queer patient die a few weeks ago that didn't have any biological family, but had a huge chosen family. And I heard caregivers make really inappropriate comments about, well, they think they're all that because they have this huge family. It's not even their real family, but it is their real family. Your chosen family is your real family. Losing your like best gay friend like David did, that's like losing a sibling to a lot of people. It's that person has been part of your experience, part of your queer experience that sometimes your own siblings can't understand that experience. So I just want anyone that's listening to know that if you're grieving right now, it's okay. And it's okay if your grief is really messy and if you're not grieving the way that you think that you should or you have seen it done on TV. There's no right or wrong way to grieve. It's all okay. You shouldn't hurt other people or try to hurt yourselves. But other than that, all grief is okay. Don't go hitting your dogs or chickens. Um, we, um, they, one of the points that we had on the slideshow, I don't think you guys can see, but I wanted to just read it. Settler colonialism limits our grief, which shapes people's mindsets and policies. So, like, who does your employer or insurance company say is legitimate? Like, can you get 3 days off when your best friend died? No. If your husband died, but they don't see that you're married and you're a guy, sometimes no. Um, the they always ask, is this person classified as family? It's really hard because they might really be your family, but the insurance or your boss doesn't agree with that. Indigenous cultures have a huge idea of family. They have a way more expansive ideas and conceptualization of families than me as, generic white girl living in Texas. Um, they might grieve a lot longer and in different ways, and it's still grief. Um, Yeah, so we wrote under disenfranchised grief that sometimes relationships are not acknowledged, like chosen family partners that are not publicly out. One of my sweet guys that died before Christmas, he told all of us, including me, that his roommate was dying. I'm sorry, that he was dying, and it was his roommate that was going to grieve. But they've been married for 30 years. But he did not want his roommate to lose out on benefits or to be treated differently. So they slept in separate rooms and called each other roommate, even though I know they were deeply in love. So now, when I'm supporting him afterwards, I'm acknowledging his grief that it wasn't just his roommate that died, that it was his husband, his lover, his life partner. But how sad that people, not just older adults, sometimes younger people. I'm 45. I have hospice patients younger than me, and they're terrified of anyone knowing that they're gay. So they say things like roommate, or that's my best friend, or my whatever cousin, but it's actually their lover. Um, let's see here. I wanted to talk a little bit about criminalizing and I can't say that word, pathologizing pathology. So making grief a pathology. We often, as an American culture, dictate what is healthy and what is unhealthy. And then we judge people based on that. It's really unhelpful to judge people based on how they're grieving. Um, Certain cultures grieve in different ways. Even just in where I live in Central Texas, we have a large Amish population. We have a large Mormon population. And within even the Mormon population, we have Black Mormons. We have a huge Hispanic Mormon population. So it's really unfair for me to say, well, that is not appropriate grief, or I can't believe she's doing that. Look at the way she's freaking out in the room. It's not okay because each family, each person is going to bring themselves into the table. There's no one right way to grieve. When people are dying, I always remind them that to die with dignity is to die how you've always lived. So for me, I'll probably go out perky and telling jokes and laughing because that's who I am. My partner is more solemn and serious. She is hilarious with me, but she is an introvert. She's a deep thinker. So for her, when it's time for her to pass, it will likely be a small group around her. Mine will be like a big party with margaritas, like Paul's friend, or cosmopolitans. Fireworks, I want the full shebang. Once someone has passed, the way that we celebrate them is also very individual. Once I pass, I don't know how my family and friends will celebrate and will grieve my loss, but it will look different than the way that they grieve my wife. Doesn't mean that I was more important or she was more important. It's just different. I think with people who have mental health issues, grief exasperates it. Grief exasperates pain. It exasperates insomnia. Um, for those of us in the room with ADHD, grief makes us even more ADHD, less focused. I always tell my patients' families, if you leave your car keys on top of your car or your cell phone ends up in the refrigerator, don't worry, you're not getting dementia. This is just grief. Grief takes it out of you. It takes so much out of your body. It exasperates everything. So if you were tired before, you're going to be really tired now. If you struggled with focus before the loss, you're going to really struggle afterwards. So I would caution anyone who's being told, well, that's pathology, that's sickness, that's mental illness. Maybe it is, but also maybe you're just grieving, and we have to give ourselves a lot of grace and space to do that. Um, I think that's what I want people to hear on this webinar, that you would leave thinking, it's okay if it takes me longer than 3 days to grieve. It's okay if it takes me 3 months to grieve something. And it's okay if the person who died is not my husband, wife, child. It's okay if they were chosen family. It's okay if they were your best friend. We talked a little bit as a group when we were planning this with grief. We talked about just with healthcare. Um, I've been in healthcare for 11 years now, and I also taught death and dying at Baylor for 5 years. I've done hospice chaplaincy for most of the last 11 years. I have worked in other areas of healthcare, but hospice is really my one true passion. I love getting to sit with people at the end of life. I like being the last one there when the people are passing, and I like getting to know that wherever they're going next, that they got to experience a lot of love and comfort from me and their family or friends before they left. So there are a lot of things that we could talk about being queer at the end of life. Um, there's a lot of erasure, erasing who you are at the end. So maybe you were married for 25 years, or you and your girlfriend lived together for your entire adult life, and then you go back to being roommates. Um, there's a lot of assumptions made by staff and doctors and even funeral homes about the relationship. Um, People always think that my wife is my sister. They're like, "Oh my God, your sister's great." I'm like, "Thanks. That's not my sister. That's my wife." They just automatically assume. And that can be really hard when you're older or when you're dying. You already feel really vulnerable, and then you add in like you can't really be who you are, and or people are like, oh, okay, well, that's not really important. I see that doctors do that frequently. Oh, okay, whatever, it's not your sister, that's fine. No, it's actually not fine. It's important to know that this is my wife. She's the one making medical decisions for me. She is the one that will be the patient when I'm gone. So I was thinking, I was looking at this healthcare thing that we had written out. Sometimes, well, not sometimes, most of the time, heteronormative defaults are what's happening. Um, Even as a clinician, when I'm documenting after the death, I might say offer care to patient's wife and children, um, family grieving appropriately. Um, and a lot of times the clinicians don't know what to type after someone has passed when they're queer, because they're like, do I write their family is grieving appropriately? Or if there's one person that's it's not totally abnormal for people to pass out or start crying so hard that they have a panic attack. And then obviously the chaplain or caregiver is going to support that person. And then you document that you supported said person, and it can be tricky based on their relationship to the deceased. Um, the healthcare prejudice and legal sidelining of chosen family. I see this a lot when a queer person is dying. The family shows up, and maybe they haven't been around that loved one for years, and they say, "Well, I'm the dad, so I'm going to make decisions for this my queer son." But queer son has been partnered for years, and so all of a sudden, the doctors and nurses and everyone are listening to the dad who just showed up. It's really unfair. I fight big time for the partners, even if they're not married, to be able to have the most say in what happens to their loved one. Family members often won't make eye contact with the queer lovers or queer friends. They dismiss them entirely. It's like by being straight and their biological family, that means they're like the ones that can make decisions, which is not the truth. Um, we talked a little bit about the role of a death doula. I don't know if any of you guys on here have heard the word doula. We usually think about it with babies. A mom's going into labor and you don't want a lot of extra medical necessities or medical interventions. People hire doulas. There's a huge, growing, much needed trend of death doulas now. Death doulas basically advocate for you at the bedside. They make sure that your voice is heard even when you can't talk anymore. They also make sure that your post-death rituals happen. Fun fact, I'm not Mormon, so I can't touch a Mormon body after they die. So if I have a patient that's Mormon, I have to wait for a death doula that is Mormon or someone from the church to come in and do post-mortem care on the body. Um, if they're Baptist, I can touch them. So it's important if you have a religion that's not mainline, that you have a death doula, someone advocating that says, no, after my person passes or after I pass, this is what I want. Um, Also in America, in most hospitals, we can't wait to get your body out of there. We're like, go, 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 go to the morgue. And families deserve to have time with their loved one in the nursing home, in their home, or at the hospital, or wherever the patient has died. Death doulas and chaplains will advocate for you to have way more time and to not just hurry up and move on with the next step. Cultural humility also. The death doulas are incredible at making sure that the culture of the person dying and the culture of the family is respected. Um, David, I think you are going to jump in on some of the specific grief realities.
Wow, Sarah, that was a lot. Every time I hear a presentation or we talk, I learn something different. What was interesting when I was going to talk a little bit about, and you covered a lot of these things about specific realities of LGBTQ relationships and how that affects how we operate when we're grieving. But you had said something at the beginning. You talked about there's no one right way to grieve. There's no, there's many different facets of it. And then you were talking about in the heteronormative standards in healthcare about writing your documentation, and it made me chuckle because you would write a note saying family grieving appropriately, and then I'm like, oh wait a minute, I thought there was no appropriate way to grieve.
If we put not grieving appropriately, then you have to write a whole essay on what they were doing, how you did it. So yes, I put appropriately, but every time I write that, David, I actually feel bad because I am like giving a stamp of approval. I'm saying they're grieving
Right,
appropriately,
right,
in
you're
the
making a judgment, you're, yes,
I
yeah,
am.
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
deciding that their grief is appropriate, which who am I to say that?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Interesting. It was just interesting, and many of these things that Sarah brings up and issues that we all face, and specifically too, there's some of the other realities that Sarah touched on, complex family systems, and working from the um, aging support and financial and legal planning end of it. Um, there are lots of issues around complex family situations, either through children from previous straight marriages, or children or the immediate and extended families, and then you have the chosen family, getting legal recognition. Just I always think, in the heteronormative world or straight world, you always have the when someone dies, sometimes there's the greedy children or the hostile relative who's going to jump in, try and wreak havoc or take things. That gets compounded and exacerbated, as Sarah had mentioned, in queer families and queer relationships, because minimizing relationships or not honoring things can happen at a higher rate. A couple I know just personally have been together a long time, and the one husband was from Argentina, from a pretty wealthy family, and the partner, they live in Florida up here, or that's where I am. I'm in Florida. Uh, the husband died, and now the family from Argentina is swooping in, damned be with the wills and everything else. They're, inappropriately taking over houses and things like that. So not honoring is a real problem. And then also, you mentioned about straight people not looking at queer partners or the gay family in the eye, or trying to like not deal with it because they're uncomfortable with it. A lot of LGBTQ people are more comfortable with more open relationships, polygamy, thruples, like 3 people, or consensual non-monogamy. So it's something to navigate, and there's a lot of grief, shame, and maybe afraid to bring that up around caregivers, but also around family. So that's something that has to be navigated too, that you do a lot in your work. And I think too, when we were putting this together, there's such in our current political and religious the way it is in our society right now about attacking transgender rights and LGBTQ families and BIPOC and immigrant families. There's a lot of harming of the other and dehumanizing that filters into grief for loss of dignity and respect for trans and gender diverse people, as well as anybody who's different, really comes to the forefront when there's grief involved, because you're not safe. It's not safe to grieve. It's not. You can't openly share. You can't acknowledge certain aspects, and that I feel keenly, and just grief not dying, or grief not related to death. I've had several trans friends move from the state of Florida because of politics. There's grief there. They're leaving behind a life they loved, or a job or people. And it's how do we acknowledge that, and we're afraid to acknowledge it. So many specific realities, just adding on to what you spoke about. And a lot of these can be dealt with planning and with thinking, and that's part of what this webinar series, that's what we're doing. And in April, I'll be coordinating that webinar more, and that will be more about the practical advance directives, living wills, legal papers, creating things and making your wishes known, and also not just creating them, but sharing them and then updating them and making sure like your hospice chaplain and your caregiving staff all knows it. So we'll go into much more depth on that. And today's webinar is more of an overview and kind of get us thinking about all these issues, which I definitely am. And I want to leave time for some great Q&A and discussion. So that's just to share that all of this that we've talked about, it's universal. It's like not niche. It's not rare. It's not just for gay people. And it's not our fault. It's not your fault either. These outside external things that are happening to you. It's good to know that it's not rare and it's not our fault. And on that note, I'm going to hand it over to Paul for our last segment before we kind of get into the Q&A.
All right, so my last segment assigned was grief as resistance and transformation, based on a quote from the series that we've been pulling from, and pardon the language. Quote, "You're fucked up. It's okay. You can be messy as fuck and still be worthy of love from yourself and others." And so I think what really comes to mind for me with this quote is what's going on with Ms. Good, the woman who was murdered in Minnesota, and how certain political elements are trying to demonize her because she was lesbian, and how the community is not allowing that to happen. And the country is not allowing that to happen. And that's really important. So I think, we can think of how we celebrate the people we lose as also a chance to, publicly redeem them or publicly celebrate them, making sure that they're respected in public discourse is really important. So Dave, am I supposed to handle this last transition doula part? Feels like that should be someone else.
Tasha Fierce is the transition doula who had that quote. That's not a topic of
I see.
doulas.
Okay,
Yeah.
Great. Thanks for that. So what some of the concepts that we're hoping to walk away from today with, being comfortable with accepting impermanence and non-linearity as a foundational aspect of our lives. I'm 67. It's astonishing to me how much time I spend not only dealing with my own shifting health statuses, but with those of all of the older adults around me, gay, straight, or family. I think I invited so many people to this series, and a lot of them said, it sounds really interesting. It sounds like a good idea, but I'm just not ready to do that. I'm like, you're 70 years old. When are you going to be ready? grieving calls on us to just move with the moment, and it tells us what to do. I think the more that we sort of normalized our communications about death, the better we are able to receive those prompts from ourselves. So the key takeaways we have: grief is not weakness. It's inherently transformative and can be a very positive experience. And that grief fuels care, justice, and collective survival. So now we're going to stop recording. We're going to continue the discussion. We invite you to